If only there had been a country in recent history to have been spoken of by global analysts as one of the most promising to become a superpower, except China, it is Brazil. The fifth largest country by area and population alike, Brazil is rich in natural resources. Most of us know Brazil for the Amazon rainforest or the football legends it's produced. But Brazil hasn't been that far behind to take up the international mantle and become one of the powerful countries. But Brazil, despite every resource it has been bestowed with, fails to make its mark, signaling something wrong within the geopolitical spectrum of Brazil. But in order to understand the situation, it is important to take a step down memory lane and witness why the land of carnivals and samba is still so horribly poor. Struggling with starvation, unemployment, corruption, underdevelopment, and austerity. Brazil. Almost a superpower? Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Brazil seemed like it was about to take over the world. They had tons of land, abundant natural resources, urbanization and exports doing great, especially coffee. But even though Brazil looked great from the outside, what was really going on inside the country was not so good. All the coffee economy and foreign exchange reserves and cities in construction hid the fact that the country was politically mismanaged, ruled by oligarchs, and in the stranglehold of the Brazilian elitist capture. After the monarchy in Brazil fell, the republic came under the control of leaders mainly from São Paulo and Minas Gerais. People started calling them the coffee presidents. But these guys weren't exactly voted in fairly. The elections were fixed, only rich landowners could vote. And these local political bosses, the coronéis, were in charge. Sure, they brought some money and growth to the country, but they mostly cared about keeping the coffee mafia happy. As for everyone else, the poor farmers, native folks, and city workers, the government didn't care too much about them. But Brazil showed great potential in the early years as a promising economy. Coffee was the main reason it grew so fast. In the early 1900s, coffee was more than half of what the country exported. São Paulo changed from a small town to a big business center because of coffee money and a ton of immigrants. Santos, the port city, became extremely busy. But relying too much on one thing was risky. When they grew too much coffee, they upset the supply demand, causing coffee prices to drop. The prosperity was about to fall, tumbling down. The government had to buy extra coffee in 1906 to keep prices from falling too low. Focusing on one agriculture export and not transitioning to an industrial economy was the main reason Brazil faced a severe fiscal crisis when everyone else was prospering quite steadily. The world had entered into a rapid era of industrialization after the First World War. Germany was rebuilding everything from scratch at a pace that startled some and horrified all, and so was the USA. But Brazil didn't have factories or a strong local market to help it out. It was merely surviving on exports of raw materials. The success in big cities like São Paulo and Rio hid the fact that other places like the Northeast and the Amazon were not doing well. They were devoid of even basic infrastructure. People were still dying of diseases that were already cured in most of the post-war world. Brazil wasn't even as strong as a colonial outpost, let alone on the path to be a superpower. Two different sides of Brazil. One big reason Brazil couldn't become a superpower is that it had two Brazils. As the historian Euclides da Cunha said, one part was the modern, metropolis-like, coffee-producing southeast. The other part was the poor, rural interior, where people were starving, traditional, and not part of the country's progress. This split wasn't just about culture or money, it was also about politics. The rich people in charge in São Paulo and Minas Gerais didn't care about including the poor people in decisions or helping them get better lives. The 1920s were a time when people started to get fed up. Young military guys called lieutenants started revolting. They were annoyed that the rich were in control and things weren't getting better. They weren't exactly perfect believers in democracy, but they wanted things to change. They wanted a stronger government, resources owned by the country, better social laws, and less corruption. Even so, they didn't work well with the growing middle class, so their revolts didn't get much support from the people. There was a big gap between the people who wanted change and the people who could make it happen, and they just couldn't connect. Leadership failures and lost chances. Things changed during the Great Depression. World markets tanked, coffee prices dropped again, and Brazil's economy just couldn't hold up. Then, in 1930, Getulio Vargas took over in a coup, ending the coffee crowd's control of politics. Vargas was a complicated guy, part people person, part dictator. He grabbed power, made the government a bigger part of the economy, and brought in key social changes like minimum wage, worker protection, and a focus on a self-sufficient economy. These actions helped set the stage for a more varied economy. Vargas didn't exactly play nice with democracy either. During his Estado Novo period, if you opposed him, you were out of luck, and the press couldn't say what it wanted. Sure, he wanted to modernize Brazil and bring everyone together, but he did it with a tight grip, which hurt political groups and people. Brazil did better economically, but its politics took a hit for the worse. Brazil in World War II. A missed chance? World War II brought the horrors of death, but also the hope of booming business for different countries. Brazil took some interesting steps during World War II. They sided with the Allies, went to war against Germany and Italy, and actually sent soldiers to Italy to fight. This war helped Brazil get some upgrades for its military and infrastructure thanks to help from the US. Because Brazil was involved in the war and had a spot on the League of Nations Council for a bit, some people thought Brazil might become a bigger deal worldwide. That didn't last, though. Vargas got kicked out in '45, and even though Brazil went back to being a democracy, politics were still all over the place. When Vargas got re-elected in '50, his second time as president wasn't as smooth. He had less power, people detested him, and the economy was a mess with inflation, debt, and slow industrialization. He couldn't make anyone happy. Not the people who wanted the government to control everything, and not the people who wanted foreign money. Things ended badly when he killed himself in '54 because of a scandal and too much pressure. Kubitschek's big plan and what it took. President Juscelino Kubitschek, 1956 to 61, wanted Brazil to be great again. His catchphrase, 50 years of progress in 5, wasn't just a narrative. While he was in charge, Brazil built more highways, hydroelectric projects, and steel factories. He even constructed Brasilia, a modern capital city in the middle of nowhere, to represent Brazil's ambition. The progress, again, seemed to only last a few good months. The debt servicing for Brazil skyrocketed, inflation boomed, and quality of life took a dive. Kubitschek had big dreams for developing the country, but it just wasn't going to work in the long run. The class struggle was becoming real. The capitalist nightmare had unfolded in Brazil. The 1990s, mess, corruption, and trust issues. In the initial democratic presidential election since the 60s, Fernando Collor de Mello, young, charming, and a real go-getter, beat Lula da Silva, the Workers' Party's union leader. Lula had a strong socialist plan, but Collor sold himself as the guy who would fix Brazil's corruption and make the economy grow quickly. Here's the messed up part. Collor's time as president turned out to be one of the most corrupt Brazil had ever seen. By '92, he got caught in a huge scandal involving trading favors. Millions of dollars had been secretly stashed away in bank accounts. It was a national embarrassment. He was about to be impeached, so he quit right after the Senate started his trial. Even with all the drama, the Collor impeachment was a good thing in some ways. It was the first time Brazil fixed a political mess without the military getting involved. Collor's vice president, Itamar Franco, took over. But Franco, even though he meant well, had a tough time getting things under control. Inflation went crazy, almost 2,700% each year. Factories decreased production. People's paychecks were basically disappearing. It looked like Brazil couldn't even handle its own money problems. How could it ever think about being a big player in the world? Technocracy, hope, and scandal. Fernando Henrique Cardoso's ascent signified a pivotal moment in Brazil's economic narrative. A politician who began as a sociologist, he unveiled the real plan while serving as finance minister. A daring, technocratic initiative that terminated hyperinflation by launching a new currency, the real, partly tied to the US dollar, and stopping the government's inflationary pricing indexation. Inflation dropped from 1,000% in 1994 to nearly zero by 1998, providing Brazil with much-needed economic relief. Building on this success, Cardoso was elected president in 1994 and celebrated as a contemporary Vargas or Kubitschek, an individual ready to merge stability with growth. His government enacted constitutional changes to permit presidential re-election, privatized unproductive state-owned companies such as the Rio Doce Valley Company, and opened Brazil's markets to international investors. However, weaknesses quickly emerged. The financial crises in Asia and Russia during the late 1990s unsettled Brazil, compelling the government to let the currency float and discard its dollar peg. Failures of the 21st century. Brazil kicked off the 21st century looking good. Back in the 2000s when Lula da Silva was president, the country's economy grew, poverty went down, and people around the world started to respect Brazil. Lula made Brazilians feel hopeful about the future. When he passed the baton to Dilma Rousseff in 2010, it looked like Brazil was all set to impress the world, especially with the World Cup in 2014 and the Olympics in 2016 coming up. But instead of showing off how strong Brazil was, these big events revealed some serious problems. Inside the country, corruption messed up the political system. The Petrobras scandal, which was huge, made people lose faith in the government. Lots of politicians and business people, including people from Lula and Rousseff's government, were involved. Rousseff wasn't directly accused of corruption in the Petrobras case, but because she was connected to it and messed with the budget in a way that people didn't like, she got impeached in 2016. Then, the person who took her place, Michel Temer, was also accused of corruption, which just made the political situation even worse. Brazil's economy tanked into its worst slump in years. The GDP went down, prices went up, and lots of people lost their jobs. The country's GDP growth of 7.5% per year completely tanked by 2015. After the global financial crisis, the demand for raw goods slowly decreased. And since Brazil's economy was dependent on the export of raw materials only, it quickly lost its footing too. Brazilians became extremely frustrated with poor healthcare, education, economy, and infrastructure, which led to huge protests in 2013. This anger opened the door for Jair Bolsonaro. He was a former army captain who ran on promises to fight corruption and bring back law and order. But instead of fixing things, his time as president was full of fighting, crazy comments, environmental problems, and a terrible reaction to COVID-19. While he was in charge, the Amazon forest got chopped down way faster, which made other countries become critical of Brazil and invest in it. Brazil also became one of the worst places for the pandemic because they were slow to get vaccines. And Bolsonaro kept denying how bad things were. Brazil kind of blew its chance on the world stage. It used to be a major voice for developing nations and a central player in BRICS. But then things got messy at home, and its diplomacy suffered. While other countries got stronger, Brazil got caught up in scandals and protests, and its economy tanked. Even when Lula got back in office in 2023, he took over a country that was really split. Fans of Bolsonaro just wouldn't accept the loss and attacked government buildings. Kind of like what happened at the US Capitol, which just goes to show how fragile Brazil's democracy is right now. Every country beholds the potential to make it big on the international front, and become a superpower, but it takes sheer determination, unwavering dedication, and impeccable loyalty to one state to achieve all this. As we see in the case of Brazil, even with natural resources, a booming population, and all the right arrangements, it couldn't even become a significant power. A silent message for the nations that what it takes is a simple formula to become great, and many leaders don't have what it takes.